Reading this book called I Am N. And N is the Arabic letter that they put on Christians' households that in Muslim countries. And they mark them so that they know that these are Christians. And this community of believers, this book, I Am N, is of current martyrs, current people that are following Jesus and what's happening to them. And as I'm reading this book, I'm going, do I even know how to love him? Like, I'm reading this story of a man who is passing out Bibles, and they were told him to stop doing it. And the church that he was a part of, I feel that same way sometimes. Just like that. A little bit this morning, but that's beside the point. Wouldn't it be nice just to do that sometimes, right? Like, for real, when you're having a bad day, right? It would feel so good. Anyway, back to this. Just scream at the top of your lungs. I'm sorry, it's just going through my head. So the church he was a part of said to him, you know that there's kidnapping and torturing, there are extremists, that they're cutting Christians into pieces. But this man would not stop sharing Jesus. And then one day as he's walking down the street, he gets stopped and he gets kidnapped by the secret police. And the congregation starts to pray for him, and he's put away. And he says this story. He said, the police followed him and pulled a black bag over his head and whisked him away to a prison cell crowded with long-bearded Muslim extremists who had run afoul of the secret police. And they said, why are you here? And he said, for sharing the love of Christ, which I'd like to share with you too. And then the next day, the head of the secret police sat across from Boutros and angrily interrogated him. And he responded with love, not like-minded anger. He said, I was just giving out Bibles, and the Bible teaches us to pray for our leaders and respect them. And then the officer calmed down, and Boutros looked at him in the eye and said, God is love, and he loves you. And then the officer said, why is this? And then they had this conversation, and then finally the officer kind of relents and lets him go home. And he says the next day he was back on the streets proclaiming the gospel to all who would listen. And I read this book and I go, do I know how to love like that? Do I know how to love? Like we go, Jesus, we love you. But when we're called upon to love, what choice do we make? When we're called upon to push through the difficult moments, what choice do we make? When we're called upon to follow him as far as he will call us, as far as he calls us and invites us, what choices do we make? And so I read these books, and I have to be honest with you, you know, through ups and downs and ins and outs, I'll look at Tony and I'll go, my head is still attached to my body today. Because I'm reading stories in here of machetes that were cut a person in half, a child, while their parents looked on because they would not renounce Christ. Do I know how to love him like that? So I actually ordered this book. It only cost $5, and they're for sale out there because I want us as a community to read this book and pray over it and just let it sit with us. Because for me, in this 21st century Western culture of comfort that I live in, this reminded me that there's other people out there that do not have what I have. And it's profound to me. And I go, do I know how to follow you to the end? So it's a beautiful challenge. It's not guilt-ridden, but it certainly brings balance into my life and certainly helps me recognize what I have and what we have. So I encourage you to get that. And we're studying the upside down kingdom. And when I think about the upside down kingdom, I think about those lives that are in the Middle East right now that are standing for that. And I think about how God has called us to something that's different than what it looks like in this world. I'm not convinced that I am living the upside down Rome. I get easily offended. I get upset. I get depressed. I lose my focus on Jesus. I can enter into a bitterness and a resentment quicker than I enter into love. And I'm forever challenging myself and just going, do I live in this upside down kingdom? Because I don't believe that following Christ is just a religious practice. I believe that following Christ is to be our life, and it's to be our identity, and it's to be who we are in this world. And that the way that people will know who we are is because we look and act different. And I wonder how much I blend in. And I wonder, do I know what it means to love him? So as we go into this text today, I go in with that thought in my head. I can read this and go, yes, that's so good. Yes. And then I get up from my chair, and it's like in a minute, it's disappeared from my very soul. But here are the words that I've been meditating on this week as I read that book and other books, which you'll hear me talk about in a minute. Matthew 6 in the Passion Translation, Matthew 5 in the Passion Translation, starting with verse 43. Your ancestors have also been taught to love your neighbors and hate the one who hates you. However, I say to you to love your enemy. Bless the one who curses you. Bless the one who curses you. Do we do that? Do I do that? Do something wonderful for the one who hates you, and respond to the very ones who persecute you by praying for them. For that will reveal your identity as children of your heavenly Father. See, if we want to look like this world, we easily can walk and embrace the division, the disunity, the you're not the boss of me, the you can't talk to me like that, the rejection, the hardening our heart, the breaking off relationship when it gets difficult, the not wanting to have dialogue because you disagree, all of these things. And he goes, what will reveal your identity as children is that you can stand in the fray, is that you can love in the midst of hatred. And then he said, because you see, he is kind to all by bringing the sunrise to warm and rainfall to refresh, whether a person does what is good or is evil. God's love is extended to this world over all of us. And sometimes we get really mad when we see jerky people being blessed. Come on. Thank you for raising your hands. When we see people getting rewarded and we don't think they deserve it. But God is kind to all by bringing the sunrise to warm and the rainfall to refresh. See, God has a bit different system than we do. We have a system of checks and balances, and God has a system that pours out and that gives beyond anything any of us could ever ask or imagine. He is so much bigger. So what reward do you deserve if you only love the lovable? See, that's where I live. It's so much easier to love those I love or who are lovable. It's so much easier. Don't even the tax collectors do that. How are you any different from others if you limit your kindness only to your friends? Don't even the ungodly do that. Since you are children of a perfect Father in heaven, you are to be perfect like him. And that perfect means whole. How do we do that? You know, to be truly upside down, loving when unforgiveness and hatred seem to be the appropriate answer? How do we love when somebody doesn't deserve that kind of love? Because our love is not to be based on another person, but our love is to be based on Christ. We don't love because others like us or because they're worthy of being loved or not. We love because Jesus invites us into that love. That's why we love. That we are called to love in word and deed when a person deserves something else. Ooh. Ooh, 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 ooh. It's so hard. So hard. So when I have been preparing for this and thinking about it and reading I Am N, and I've also been reading Martin Luther King a lot, because this is the eve of the day that we celebrate his birthday. And, you know, I wanted to do something that was a little different that I've never done before, because when I'm looking at this sermon on loving my enemy, see, I don't do really good with this. I don't. Because my flesh wants to get in the way all of the time. Because you see, I was brought up in a 21st century culture that says, you're not the boss of me. You're not going to get one over on me. And I was brought up in a family system that you had to be scrappy, that you had to beat the other before you got beat, that you had to build up walls of defense about you in order to survive. That's how I was brought up. So this is the antithesis of every defense mechanism that is possibly built into my body. So for me to walk this way, like when I tell you that it's like rewire the brain, Lord, rewire my brain, because it is one of the most difficult things that I do in my life, because I have been taught to be a fighter and God is inviting us to be a lover. So much harder to do that. So as I'm preparing this sermon on loving your enemy, and I'm reading Martin Luther King, the Reverend Doctor, and I read this man who was one of my all-time heroes, and I go, how did he do that? Because you see, my house has never been firebombed because of the color of my skin. And I have never been spit on because of the color of my skin. And I've never had racial slurs thrown at me, or bricks through my family window, or beatings or jailings because I was standing up for something that was right. Never had that happen to me. That this man repeatedly ran into the fray for love, for a higher call, for a battling on behalf of the other and on behalf of his people, and saying something's got to change. See, that's love. That is loving your enemy. I can't touch it. I can't touch it. Because what he did was stand in the face of such opposition of friends and family and other clergy telling him that he was wrong. But he knew that love won. He knew what love could do. So he lived out this loving your enemy. He lived out blessing those who curse you. He lived out doing something wonderful for the one who hates you. And he lived out praying for the very ones who persecute you. And you know what? It worked. We are living the benefit of what that man did. We are living it. Look at this beautiful body that we have. Look around you. I look at the diversity in this congregation, and it is the seed that he planted. Because if this were the 1950s or the 1940s when he was out there fighting, this never would have happened. Who we are never would have happened. And you know what? I know, and what grieves my heart is even in this day and age, 51 years later, we are still the exception and not the rule. We still have so far to go. We are still, as a country, not where we need to be. But we are further along than we've ever been. And it's a good thing. And I think about this little body that we are a part of. And I believe that God wants to do something so big, to go, there is more beauty and love. And that we are an image of what Christ wants to do in his church. I so believe that. And I believe that our little church is meant to make an even greater difference in this world. Because we are wrestling with love, with all of its various colors, with all of its various shapes and sizes and images and ways of life. And we are trying to figure it out. And we are trying to go, love wins. And what does that look like? What does that look like? And I think about the many denominations and systems that are out there that don't even believe in a female pastor, that don't even believe that a woman should be in ministry. Because you see, when you stand up for love and when you stand up for the marginalized and the disenfranchised and you actually enter into the upside down kingdom, there is a cost. When I was installed into this position as a pastor, we lost people in our church because they could not have a woman as a leader. That's what happens when you enter into an upside-down kingdom. And I think about the world that is divisive and that still has within its laws and its systems that essence of exclusion. There are people that are in and there are people that are out. And where boundary lines remain with all of those assigned prejudices. And yet here we are. And here we sit in all of our diversity and in all of our different beliefs and in all of our trying to figure out how to do this together and how to love fearlessly together. And I truly believe that when you try to love fearlessly, and when you try to live out what that looks like, there will be a cost. When I look at the lives within this book, following Jesus is not comfortable. It comes at a cost. And when I look at the life of Martin Luther King, and I look at all that he did, it came at a great cost to him. And as I'm reading these stories of nights where he was kept awake, or when I look at pictures of him and you can just see the look on his face of exhaustion, there's a cost when you stand up for the marginalized. There is a cost when you stand up for the disenfranchised. There is a cost when you begin to question systems and the way that they are, and you begin to say something is wrong in the way that we are doing this. There is a cost. There is a cost. Suddenly the door in becomes very small and the door out gets really wide. But you see, this to me is the upside down kingdom. I don't want to just play church. I don't want to just go through some religious motion. I want to be a follower of Jesus, and I want to be a part of a community where we follow Jesus. But this is what it looks like to be poor in spirit, to look out and to go, I don't have all the answers, I don't really know. And I empty myself, Lord. But what I do know is I know Jesus. And I know his love. And this is what it means to mourn and to be meek and to hunger and thirst for righteousness and to be merciful and to be peacemakers and to be persecuted for following Jesus. It costs to follow Jesus. And if my life is super comfy and I'm not being asked for something that's bigger than me, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. Because when I'm looking at these lives And it's not going to look the same. I'm not going to have someone chasing me with a machete. I'm not. It's not in our culture. But when I think about these lives and Martin Luther King's life, and I just go, what are you inviting us into that's greater than we are? And that keeps me on my knees because it's so much bigger than me. And it's so much bigger than this community. So what I want to do this morning, because my words are my words, I wanted to read an excerpt out of his sermon, Martin Luther King's sermon on loving your enemies. So when I was reading it, I'm like looking at it going, yeah, well, you kind of say it better. And you know, there's something to me, there's something to me about hearing from somebody who talks the talk, walks the walk, and put his life on the line for this message. And I don't think there was a greater message that he could have given or that he lived out than this one. So I'm going to pause in between because I just want us to